Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Introducing the Creative Industries. And this week is already our 15th week as we're approaching towards the end of the year and also closer to the end of the term. That we're starting to have a look at different regions and their practices in terms of the creative industries and how that's connecting back to the models that we shared previously in the class, which include the international models of creative industries and then also that different kind of the practices embedded in different approaches, which might include the definitions of different industries and then also the definitions of culture industries, CCIs, and creative industries, and so on. Now that we have a better understanding of what those are and its historical context, we can move on to different markets. And last week we were on Taiwan, and this week that we will be on South Korea and Japan. I'm sure that there have been quite a lot of creative products from both of these countries that you must be quite familiar with, potentially, especially those of you growing up in Taiwan. And so it might include Japanese music, anime, and then also K-pop, K-drama, and so on. So today we're actually having a look at how these were developed and how they were origin in the first place, and what kind of policy might facilitate that and continue to help it to grow. So let's just get started. So this is the outline of our lecture today. Firstly, we will have a look at Hallyu, Hallyu. And then secondly, we'll move on to take a look at KOCCA, which is the content creative agency in Korea. And what's its role, what does it do, and what has it achieved so far. And then we'll look at CJ Group, which is a big conglomerate, which include entertainment sectors, which have been really strong and powerful. And I'll give you a few examples when we get to that. And then also we will have a look at the cultural policy in South Korea and how it has changed over the years to what it is right now. And definitely we will spend some time to have a look at K-pop as well, from how it was produced to how it was disseminated and perceived by the market domestically and internationally. Last but not least, we will spend a bit more time on Korea, and Japan would be used a bit like an example in terms of policy making compared with South Korea, because these two are actually really different models, even though that from the result, we might conclude that both of them have achieved certain level of international publicity in different kind of cultural forms. But they actually, internally, that the structures of the creative industries and also the attitudes from the governments have been quite different. So we will have a look at those differences, which I hope that will make us think a little bit more about how creative industries could be down to the local, regional practices. So Hallyu, I know that a lot of you might be familiar with this term. It means Korean wave. So since the election of President Kim Dae-jung's government, which is ruling from 1998 to 2003, the transnational dissemination of Korean popular culture, which what we call as Hallyu, Korean wave, has gradually transformed Korea from the Asian backwater into a vibrant, transcending, and ultra-modern society. This obviously is like a big statement, which we will break down to the more detailed parts of it. And one thing that we have to take a look at, which is from the beginning of the 21st century, which is also, during this period of President Kim Dae-jung's government's ruling, South Korea came up with this national policy, which that they are driving their industries to grow towards. It has a title, it's called Cyber Korea 21. So this has a specific focus on information and communication technologies, which are the ICT sectors. Does this make you think of another country that is pushing something similar? Yes, indeed, that their focus on ICTs were pretty much overlaid with the time that Taiwanese government started to push it. And at the time, we've already been able to see some films and animations that stand out in the local market. But at this point, that it's gradually moving towards the regional and inter-Asian markets, but not quite yet. And with the development of information communication technologies, the surrounded cultural and creative industries kind of had the room to grow as well, even though at the time that the creative products itself hasn't been that much centered in the policy schemes. But as it gradually getting more attention, KOCCA, the Korea Creative Content Agency, was established in 2001. This agency has its aim to support the globalization of Korea's creative industries. It's pursuing a strategy of going out and selling the nation's cultural products to other places in the world. So KOCCA provides not only financial, educational resources, they also provide business opportunities to network with and also support surrounding production, marketing, and promotion of creative and cultural content, as well as the global development of expansion of human and cultural technology implementation across each of these sectors. I know many of you have visited or heard about KOCCA, which established 2 years ago. You can see that a lot of those supports and then the things that KOCCA has been doing was something that KOCCA was also learning from and then was trying to implement, even though not 100% like overlay, but also that KOCCA indeed inspired our own agency to be established and then also to push for export. And presently, that KOCCA has already operated 8 global outposts. It means that they have staff, people that are in those locations who are able to promote Korean creative output, and then also, I believe that feeding back the informations in different global markets. And so the locations that they have this global outposts include China, understandably, which includes Beijing and Shenzhen, and then also Japan, United States, United Kingdoms, and also Brazil, Indonesia, and the United Arab Emirates, which are the one of the most recent established office, and the other one is Indonesia. So you can see that it's spreading out to not East Asia, but also in the US and the UK, which are the 2 very much influential markets in the English-speaking world. Brazil, understandably, which is also a leading and very unique pioneering market in Latin America. Indonesia, definitely, it's a good location in terms of probing and then also getting into the Southeast Asian markets. And then also we see their attempt in the United Arab Emirates. We'll speak a little bit more about that later, but it's also a very significant place for the Middle Eastern markets. And let's also take a look at the conglomerates, CJ Group. So in the early 2018, we see that the CJ Group announced that it would expand its cultural and e-commerce enterprises into multi-billion income generator by 2021 by a merger between its CJ EMN, which is the Korea's largest entertainment and media group, and CJO Shopping, the Chobo's home shopping and e-commerce arm. So once it's completed, this move will place CJ Group high among the top global companies seeking to increase significant growth and targeted sales in the creative industries well in the 2020s. We see the operations of conglomerates, which definitely highlighted and by CJ Group in South Korea, how that different sectors merge together and then financially that have stronger backings to get into different kind of sectors. And this is actually a good example for that. And also I would like to mention this to you, and I'm sure that many of you have known already. CJ Group is also behind the production and also distribution and actually marketing at the end for the film Parasite, which won the best film in the Oscar a couple of years ago. And I would actually like to share with you, show you the speech that Mickey Lee, which is the producer for the and also a significant member in the CJ Group, that has given on the stage of the Oscar Award, Academy Award, that when they won. And I think it really does say so much about how CJ Group has played a significant role in promoting the arts and then also pushing it into the international markets. And yeah, let's have a look at the speech and love to know how you think.
Hi, everybody. I really like to thank Director Bong. Thank you. Thank you for being you. And I like everything about him. His smile, his crazy hair, the way he talks, the way he walks, and especially the way he directs. And what I really like about him is his sense of humor, and the fact is he can be really making fun of himself, and he never takes himself seriously. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank everybody who's been supporting Parasite and who's been working with Parasite and who's been loving Parasite. And I'd like to thank my brother, who's been always supporting building our dreams, even when it looked impossible dream. Thank you, Jay. I want to thank my brother, Jay. And especially, I really, really, really want to thank our Korean film audience, our moviegoers, who's been really supporting all our movies and never hesitated to give us straightforward opinion on what they feel like their movies. And that made us really never be able to be complacent and keep pushing the directors, the creators, keep pushing the envelopes. And without you, our Korean film audience, we are not here. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So in Mickey Lee's speech, I think that you heard that she was thanking the Korean film audience particularly. I think that was really gracious, but also I think it was given this honor also back to the audience that supports the film from beginning toward the end. And then, yeah, so I think that is also a sense of emphasizing the root of their film and then also their creation, which is, I think it's interesting when you think back on how South Korea has developed from a more ICT centered economy to one that has such focus on the creative industries, but also that its definition and applications in so-called creative industries were very, very different from the models of the UK, even though, and Australia and the Commonwealth nations. Even though there might be certain similarities in terms of how they push growth, but now that I think I would like to share with you how cultural policy in South Korea has changed gradually, and so make look like what it is right now. We see between the 1960s and the 1980s, cultural products such as feature films, television programs, and radio broadcasts in South Korea were utilized by Korea's military governments to advocate national policies and to promote reoccurring pro-government messages, as well as themes of hard work and loyalty to the nation. So here, I think this will resonance with those of us who are in Taiwan, that we knew that the development of media back in especially the time during the martial law, that it was usually used for propaganda. It was usually for promoting the government's policy and messages. So this is actually a period that is a bit similar to us. And this is a photo, as you can see, that it's a wall of amplifiers, and which was used for propaganda and releasing some information. And I think that there is a wall of the amplifiers, which is actually between back then at the time South Korea and North Korea, the border, so that they're able to kind of spreading the information from the democratic side and kind of in a way pushing for union, and then also this is actually we have something similar in Taiwan as well, in Kinmen. So if you go to Kinmen Island, that there was back in the day also devices like this. So it's interesting because I think that you can see how the technology and politics have this interplay in between, and in it, like, the broadcasting systems and media has played a very significant role. However, since the military era began to end in 1988, governments began paying more attention to new trends in the information-driven society and knowledge-based economy. And then also under Kim Dae-jung's in particular, cultural products were viewed as a kind of national treasure worth protecting and supporting, especially those with commercial viability and economic value. All of Korea's major family-run conglomerates, as well as other minor industry players, began to explore never-been-seen globalization strategies and simultaneously became increasingly aware of the international cultural products and market. So see that from here, that the commercial and economic value of the creative sectors have always been the focus. And then to some extent, the globalization strategies have always been in the center, maybe influenced by the situations of the country at the time, and maybe influenced by the always outgoing ICT sectors in terms of the infrastructures and strategies. So from very early on, the international cultural products and markets have always been in the mind of the Korean policymaker. We see that Korea's creative industries at the time, primarily film, music, gaming, received escalating monetary support from the government. And the nation was truly in the midst of a major paradigm shift in which creative and cultural contents had both economic and cultural value. Especially the economic value was acknowledged relatively early on, compared to many other countries. And then also they took very major and also kind of like immediate measure to ensure that was prioritized. So President Kim Dae-jung at the time, that he came up with the idea of support without intervention, which specifically it's for the cultural contents. And we also see framework acts on promotion of cultural industries, which also launched the Cultural Industry Promotion Fund. From this point, the Korean government allocated 1% of the nation's entire budget to cultural industries in order to promote and expand Korean cultural products internationally. One thing I would like to take a look at with you is that the comparative perspective, because I think that would be able to show us a bit more about if 1% is like a lot or not really. So in 2019, the Ministry of Culture, everything, it's not just about exporting, but everything Ministry of Culture in Taiwan does was given the total budget of our almost 1% as well, which is 0.99% of the total budget in our central governments. It is interesting because you can see that focusing on exporting and international markets in South Korea has been allocated as 1% already. And for us these days, that even though that budget had been increased for Ministry of Culture over the years in Taiwan, but still it's nothing to compare with Korean budget, which started way earlier. It started 20 years before, and then the budget has always been higher and also has a specific focus on international markets. We also see Korea's free-to-air television broadcasters in 2005 after digital multimedia broadcasting was released as the next generation's network, accessible on one of the many state-of-the-art mobile devices that average Koreans were using. It means that the television broadcasters service became free for most of the Korean mobile device holder, and its influence on the foreign companies were huge because foreign, primarily giant US media and telecommunication firms at the time, had no access to Korea's DMB airwaves because of the different spectrums frequency in place. So in a way, this type of measures also promoting protectionism in Korea at the time domestically. So what we see is that domestic content producers had free rein to broadcast Korean wave content. And so increasingly since 2012, Chinese broadcasting firms had developed strong relationships with Korean broadcasters. So I know that a lot of you would know the Chinese entertainment show, which are actually, they purchase the Korean television formats. And especially after 2012, as we mentioned, programs such as I Am a Singer, Running Man, and Dad, Where Are We Going, and We Got Married, and so on, they all have their Chinese version, and the localized Chinese versions of these programs are usually co-produced with Korean producers and crew members, which guide the Chinese broadcasters to create content for local audiences. Does it make you think of the time that in 1980s and 1990s, Taiwanese television networks also were learning and also co-produce some of the contents with Japanese entertainment shows and Japanese network. So it does have some similarities, but I would say that for now, because how the format has been franchised already, not just from South Korea, but we also know shows such as X Factor and The Voice has been franchised internationally from the Netherlands to the rest of the world, from the US or from the UK to different parts of the globe. So this is getting more and more common, and it's even more institutionalized these days. And now that we're having a look at the phenomenal K-pop, when we talk about Hallyu, we usually started with Korean drama and its particular influence on the regional markets, including Inter-Asia, including China, Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and so on. And K-pop was actually coming with that wave, and then it's just thriving and thriving afterwards. We see that Lee Sun-man that formed SM Entertainment back in 1989. And it is one of the primary producers behind a variety of idol groups. heralding K-pop's international surge to fame in the 2000s. So we knew that SM signed BoA and started her training very early when she was early teens. And then her promotion outside of Korea resulted from SM Entertainment's identification of Japan as an enormously lucrative market, 20 times size of the Korean markets. So we knew that BoA received training in both Japanese and Korean languages, of course, and then all of her album earlier in the days I would have Japanese and also Korean versions. And the content was also marketed according to how those markets differentiated with one another. We also see SM Entertainment continue to push in the Japanese markets. Their attempt can be seen with the band, the girl and boy band of TVXQ, Super Junior, Girls' Generation, and EXO. Also, SM Entertainment received a YouTube Partner Gold Play Award for its SM Town channel, applauded earned achieving 1 million and more subscribers. So the award testifies to SM Entertainment's dual strategy of internationalization and maintaining a heavy online presence. To this date, K-pop video clips on YouTube have been viewed more than 7 billion times in over 230 countries. We can see how music production has been systematized in K-pop in different stages of its production, from recruitment, which may include string recruitment and also open competition, audition, and so on, to the stage of training, where the trainees would usually start in their in a very early age. They were offered quite long contracts and then long training periods. For the example of HOT, that they were trained for 4 months to 1 year. And actually for the groups later on, the training periods have become longer and longer. So for instance, Girls' Generation has been trained for 5 years. We also see refined organizational identities. Coherent brands have been something that is valued and seen important. So we can see different entertainment agencies such as SM, YG, and JYP. They have their own manufactured individualities and distinctiveness. Also, they have this tendency to emphasize on the global markets. So from foreign subsidiaries and JVs, language trainings, and then foreign members, which almost guaranteed that K-pop was produced as a global product to begin with. We also see this tendency of vertical integration, and in which the process of artist selection, musical and performance training, image making, songwriting, management, contracts, and album productions were all merged and can be done in the whole system and just under one agency. So we see that how it is an efficient, almost streamlined way of production. And let me show you an example of K-pop production process. First of all, that we see the division of creative labor from firstly, the manufacture of K-pop music and its performances, which would usually include Korean talent and management. And we also see the creative contents of K-pop that involves global music industries of North America and Europe. So we see this cyclic processes from global outsourcing, which include songwriting, production, to local manufacturings, which produce the lyrics and in charge of the management, to the last but not least process, global distribution, which were heavily dependent on the digital technology. And as for its promotion in the international markets, pop cosmopolitanism and cultural diplomacy convergence is something that we're able to see in the K-pop's practices. So there are different kind of agencies and organizations. For instance, in London, that we would be able to find Korean K-pop Academy, KCC, which is the cultural center in UK, and also K-pop dance class were organized by both of these organizations with their joint efforts. And K-pop dance classes were offered, and then you were able to see that how there are different people that are involved in the lessons. Also, that we see how the state and the industry collaborate together. We see that this is the KBC K-pop cover dance competition, and it is coordinated by KCC taking place in 2014. And also we see that the judges were include SM choreographers and then also London-based French composers and so on. And so those events which are fun, which are kind of like crossing cultures and then also promoting K-pop, have been organized locally in the UK, where I think we can also see the presence of KOCCA as well. So K-pop at the CJ Entertainment and Music booth, Korea Brand and Entertainment Expo in 2013. This is a really interesting, event, which is it's the Entertainment Expo 2013. So it includes all kinds of different countries and then also companies. But CJ Entertainment, of course, it has its presence and its booth and space in this expo. And I want to show you that how in the K-pop booth that the people attending, and specifically the young people and the teenagers, were responding to the things that they hear. So you can definitely see the kind of like the vibrant vibe, and then also the responses that they were giving listening to the K-pop music. So indeed that we are able to see how K-pop has been more and more influential to the rest of the world. And so I would actually like to take maybe 3 minutes just for us to think. Then we will be able to have it in the discussion class online, so we don't really have to write anything down, but I really kind of like encourage you to have a think about how that, first of all, we know that the domestic repertoires used to account for 80% of the recorded music sales in South Korea. It means that there's a strong support for the local industry. And now that it's becoming more and more global. So one of the questions that we may think about is that for the case of K-pop, why do East Asian youth population look to American and European performers just as much as many of them remain loyal to the more local national traditionals of popular music? The second question I think that we are able to think about is that why does it appeal to the international audience? And let's save it for the Google Meet discussion, and I'm sure that we will be able to have really productive, discussion time. Let's now have a look at K-pop's appeals internationally, and from scholars' point of view, why is it getting bigger and bigger? So according to the scholar Lai, that he breaks it down to a few different reasons, and one thing that he identified is the racial isomorphism. It means that there's this kind of closeness in terms of race or the sense of familiarity among East Asians. It means that when we look at Korean pop star, we can relate to them maybe a little bit more. And then secondly, I believe that it is because the content of K-pop music is non-threatening. it means that it has a more universal appeals. For K-pop exemplifies middle-class, urban, and suburban values that seek to be acceptable at once to college aspiring youth and their parents, a world that suggests nothing of inner-city poverty of violence, corporate or sexual radicalism, or social deviance or cultural alienation. So that the oft-repeated claim about K-pop singers' politeness, their clean-cut vision, as well as their manners and gentile demeanors is something of a nearly universal appeal, whether to Muslim in Indonesians or Catholic Peruvians. Let's have a look at a little bit of the BTS speech in the General Assembly in United Nations. I think we can definitely relate a little bit, maybe not 100%, but to what Lai has analyzed about these few things that why K-pop is popular.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General, UNICEF Executive Director, and all the excellencies and distinguished guests from across the world. My name is Kim Namjoon, also known as RM, the leader of the group BTS. It is an incredible honor to be invited to an occasion with such significance for today's young generation. Last November, BTS launched the Love Myself campaign with UNICEF, building on our belief that true love first begins with loving myself. We've been partnering with UNICEF's End Violence program to protect children and young people all over the world from violence. And our fans have become a major part of this campaign with their action and with their enthusiasm. We truly have the best fans in the world. And I'd like to begin by talking about myself. I was born in Ilsan, a city near Seoul, South Korea. It is a really beautiful place with a lake, hills, and even an annual flower festival. I spent a very happy childhood there, and I was just an ordinary boy. I used to look up at the night sky and wonder, and I used to dream the dreams of a boy. I used to imagine that I was a superhero who could save the world. And in an intro to one of our early albums, there's a line that says, "My heart stopped when I was maybe 9 or 10. Looking back, I think that's when I began to worry about what other people thought of me and starting seeing myself through their eyes. I stopped looking up at the night skies, the stars. I stopped daydreaming. Instead, I just tried to jam myself into the malls that other people made. Soon, I began to shut out my own voice and started to listen to the voices of others. No one called out my name, and neither did I. My heart stopped and my eyes closed shut. So, like this, we all lost our names. We became like ghosts. But I had one sanctuary, and that was music. There was a small voice inside of me that said, "Wake up, man, and listen to yourself." But it took me quite a long time to hear music calling my real name. Even after making the decision to join BTS, there were a lot of hurdles. Some people might not believe, but most people thought we were hopeless. And sometimes I just wanted to quit. But I think I was very lucky that I didn't give it all up. And I'm sure that I and we will keep stumbling and falling like this. BTS has become artists performing in those huge stadiums and selling millions of albums right now, but I am still an ordinary 24-year-old guy.
So as for KOCCA, again, that we also see its role in terms of promoting the music, K-pop especially, to other occasions and then also events internationally. We see that how KOCCA sponsor K-pop night out events at leading music festivals and trade shows such as Seoul International Music Fair, South by Southwest in the US, Canadian Music Week, Music Matters, and then also Midem in Cannes, France. We actually just heard that Midem will stop operating its like music affair part from this year, which came actually with a shock for many. And then also actually KOCCA has some funding, and Ministry of Culture as well, in terms of Midem's role promoting Taiwan's music. And I really hope that it works out, because else that it's just investment that's never gonna come back. But anyway, that's just another story. Those international events that we see the presence of K-pop, and a lot of the time it is KOCCA sponsored it. And it has been a productive tool for introducing new acts to global audiences, for strengthening bilateral friendship between Korea and other nations, which is kind of also like a diplomacy thing. We also see Taiwan's Ministry of Culture have been doing this, such as bringing the Taiwanese acts to South by Southwest. And as you know, that in 2020, that COVID has influenced everything. And then also, South by Southwest has become one of the first music festival that has to cancel everything. But in 2021, that they had enough time to prepare for that, so that there were some showcases were done online. And as you can see, that South by Southwest still has this Taiwan Beats, which is the presence of Taiwan online. And in terms of KOCCA's movement, that we see KOCCA and the Korean governments now have their eyes on the larger market opportunities in the UAE, as we briefly mentioned, which has a strong inroads to Saudi Arabia, where King Salman and Abdulaziz Al Saud recently published Saudi Vision 2030, which is a document that outlines an unprecedented plan for nurturing the cultural and entertainment industries, and a much larger aim for transforming Saudi Arabia into a strategic hub, bridging Asia, Europe, and Africa. So from here, that we are able to see that KOCCA was really sensitive about the development of this part of the world, and then they also would like to take it as an opportunity to also realize what they call as the Middle Eastern Dream, which is broadening the influence of the creative outputs of Korea and reach out to the particularly Arabic-speaking world. We also see the game industry in Korea has been thriving, and China is now Korea's largest export market for online games, and thus a key partner for assisting in the internationalization of Korea's gaming industry. However, Korea's market penetration rate in China has begun to decrease due to a combination of factors, which include, that there is no slide to explain that, but which includes that Chinese game industry has been thriving. And then also it has something to do with the Korean ban in China around 2015, when that the Chinese government has been deliberately restricting on the Korean entertainment industry's development in China for political reasons as well. And I think that part of it is economic. So this pretty much summarizes that what we kind of know about the Korean strategies into the international markets from the semi-public sector agency, and then also from a conglomerate like CJ Group, and then also from the strategies that come from the production companies and so on. And we also talk a little bit about the promotion in overseas, and then also the reception from the fans. Now we are going to take a look at Japan as an example that is like quite different. You might have heard about the term Cool Japan. It's a bit like Cool Britannia, right? But Cool Japan. So Cool Japan was actually not a slogan or a very well thought, proposed set of projects like Cool Britannia was, which is policy driven. Cool Japan was something that the industry had been working on for a while, and gradually that the public sector and the government give it a name. And in terms of the governance of the cultural and creative industries in Japan, that what we see is that there is no single governmental institution that plans and implements a coherent cultural policy. So the several terms such as cool Japan, soft power, national branding, content industries, and creative industries have been used, and various ministries have been involved, such as the Agency of Culture, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, and Ministry of Public Management, Home Affairs, Post and Technical Communications, and Cabinet and Office. So it means that there's a loose kind of like structure in terms of who's governing the sectors. Why different type of terms might not be clearly defined and then also used in the strategic ways, but they were only used more generically why different kind of departments or agencies were trying to illustrate certain points. So the differences between creative industries in Japan and South Korea, which is clear, is that their focus and then also the on policy are a bit different. And also we see these questions of why the ideas of creative industry has not had the significant impacts in Japan, Korea, and India. But compared to Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Singapore, that these ideas have been making a lot of impact on the policy making. But also Japan, Korea, and India actually have all, to some extent, had their model of developing their creative industries, which Korea, I think, highlighted by K-drama to begin with. Japan, we could think about animation, and India, of course, Bollywood. They had their more distinctive structures. And so terms such as gross national cool, Korean wave, soft power, content industry, and so on, were all generated and used in a more specific and more localized type of way. And today that is something interesting, that KOCCA also used the term content industry rather than cultural or creative. So content industry usually has this focus on the copyrighted materials and also their influence on other sectors. So indeed that we can see that how those terms are used differently, which also implied certain specificities in policy making. So for Japanese content industries, they have always been skeptical about the state's ability to promote the export of media cultural products, partly because the Japanese media industries developed due to the creators and corporations' great efforts alone, without having the government's help in the post-war era. And also, there was no serious attempt has been made to develop international distribution channels, which are controlled by the US-centered global conglomerates. Because even till today, that we see there are alternative and very diverse, different kind of way of distribute Japanese music to the rest of the world, isn't it? And we might have to look up on YouTube, and some of the repertoire might not be on Spotify. You might have to use other channel or platforms to find them. But there are still fans that are willing to do that and are willing to, make the effort to find them. And I think that's also one reason why the Japanese content industry have something really special in terms of their internal practices. And METI, which stands for Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, proposed easing the granting of long-stay visas to overseas creators as part of the Cool Japan once this term caught up and people started to use it, which is actually one of the most important recommendations in promoting migration of creative industry professionals. This is something actually I think that Taiwan should probably consider as well, which when you make the movement of the creators easy, and it just naturally, attracts more talents. So even though that there was this post-war absence of cultural policy in Japan, that different kind of departments still sometimes came up with strategies that may, help the content industry to thrive. And this is a good example for that. And when we think about cultural policy in Japan, last but not least, I would like to introduce you the concept by Raymond Williams, that he emphasized that there is a distinction between cultural policy proper and cultural policy as display. Let me explain to you what those two are different, and then we could chat about which one might be more similar to the model in Japan. So cultural policy proper is concerned with social democratization as support for art, media regulation designed to counter the kind of penetrating market forces that tend to marginalize profitable cultural forms and expressions of various people. And on the other hand, cultural policy as display is the public prompt of particular social order. It also takes the form of economic reductionism of culture that promotes business opportunities and economic growth. So you can see that those are two very different types of mentalities. While the former has seen the market force as something that exists, but also has to be tackled with from time to time for the sake of arts and media production. While the latter was actually going on the route of economic reductionism, less interfere, and which through it wished to promote business opportunities and economic growth. Why, of course, that the public still pump of a particular kind of social order. And as you can see, that the Japan model was definitely the latter, that it sort of just led the industries to lead and grow. And then why it's time that the cultural policy and policymakers would come into play, and then also to have a think at how they could continue to promote so. And yeah, so I think this is almost the end of our session today. And I would love to ask you a question about the South Korean model and the Japanese model. So in our Google Meet discussion, let's chat about what we can learn from each of the model. And please do compare it from the cultural products that you're familiar with, or for the art forms that you're more have more understanding towards. And yeah, please feel free to have a think, and then we will do a bit more comparison from now on, because I think that after so many sessions in this term so far, that you'll be able to come up with comparative and also critical perspective on the case that we just mentioned. So yeah, so I look forward to seeing you on Google Meet.